Hi, this is Kent Darcie. I created a series of audio programs for Transworld Radio that address the basic challenges that adults with divorced parents face. And we decided to put this series on our YouTube channel. It's a series of 10 programs that cover basic issues like anger, anxiety, forgiveness, and other areas. But before you listen, I wanted to just cover a couple of basic things. First, this series was created for a men's ministry, so it's speaking to men. But the principles that we talk about apply to everybody. And second, it was created as an international program. It has been translated into a number of languages. So from time to time, you may hear a reference to something that's not American, but that's pretty rare. But I thought I'd give you a heads up on that. And lastly, there are a lot more resources for adults with divorced parents on our website, hopeforadp.com. I hope you'll find this series helpful and shareable. Take care. Though most don't realize it on a conscious level, adult children of divorce have a difficult time trusting people, friends, relatives, coworkers, even spouses. They all must earn their trust.
Today, many marriages are ending in divorce, and as a result, millions of children are growing up in broken homes. Unfortunately, when these children grow up, many of them are still negatively impacted by the effects of their parents' divorce. Welcome to Champions Arise. I'm your host, Foster Braun. Today, we continue a series of programs that are looking at why adults with divorced parents often struggle to have healthy and lasting relationships. The goal of our guest, Kent Darcie, the founder of Adult Children of Divorce Ministries, is to provide resources that can help break the cycle of divorce that is so prevalent among adult children of divorce. Too often after a parent's divorce, not only their children have marriages that fail, but their grandchildren often divorce as well. So stay with us. Kent Darcie is going to share some great insights with us that can really help people with divorced parents build relationships and marriages that not only honor God, but glorify Him to the world. Kent, in our last program, you spoke about how adults with divorced parents are unaware often that they're being affected with anger and fears as a direct result of their parents' divorce. What you shared made perfect sense, but why haven't I, and I'm sure most of our listeners, ever heard about these issues before?
Well, when I first found out about this, I asked the same question. I mean, my parents divorced when I was 13, but it would be 30 years later before I learned that millions of children of divorce, like me, dealt with anger and the fear of abandonment and fear of doom and trust issues, fear of marriage. And, I asked, why didn't I know about this? And the answers are intriguing, and they kind of involve people on both sides of the divorce fence, if you will. On the one side are the parents. Our parents love us, and they don't want to believe that their choices could hurt us in the long term.
Sure.
Society says the kids are resilient and bounce back from divorce quickly. So everybody wants to believe that the divorce doesn't affect the kids. Parents don't talk about it, basically because in essence, there's nothing to talk about. But on the other side of the divorce are the children, who are now adults. They've been taught that their parents' split was basically a temporary inconvenience and they should be over it. And if there are any problems, they're not connected to the divorce. But also, if adult children divorce do think the divorce is affecting them, they're faced with a dilemma, really. How do they admit that they've been negatively impacted by their parents' divorce without blaming them? And this brings up really an important principle of my ministry.
And what is that key principle?
Well, basically, in my presentations, I don't teach on the topic of divorce.
Uh-huh.
In this series, we won't discuss the theology of divorce, the doctrines, the pro and cons. We're just not going there. It's important for your listeners to know that if they're divorced, I'm not throwing stones at them or putting them down. My parents are divorced, and I love them. And basically, in regards to our parents, the Bible is quite clear that we are to honor our fathers and mothers, so we will not cast blame. Unfortunately, when we speak about these issues, it may feel like we're casting blame, but that's not my heart.
Wow. Kent, how do you do both the things at the one time? Tell the truth without people feeling like they're being blamed.
Well, it's a little tricky sometimes, but my approach is real simple. Our parents' divorce happened. How can we overcome its impact and decrease the likelihood of divorce in our future? And the best way I've found to do this is to honestly look at the problems. Even though it may feel like it's personal, we have to talk about the impact in order to bring healing.
That certainly makes sense. Okay, so what are we going to be looking at then today?
Well, today we're going to be looking at the issue of trust.
So trust really becomes then the major problem for adults with divorced children?
Absolutely. It is a major problem. And though most don't realize it on a conscious level, adult children of divorce have a difficult time trusting people, all people, friends, relatives, coworkers, even spouses. They all must earn their trust. And sometimes they'll test people to see if they're actually trustworthy.
Wait a minute. Test people? What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, a man who's afraid that his wife will leave him might intentionally do things that make her mad. I mean, he doesn't realize what he's really doing, but in provoking her, he's actually testing to see if he can trust her to stay with him. And what he doesn't realize is that this usually unwarranted mistrust of his wife and other people too is actually rooted in his parents' divorce.
Oh, I see. So he doesn't realize that he has this lack of trust issue to begin with.
So that's right. That's right. And it's critical that adults with divorced parents understand issues like this because, like in the case of trust, the people who we associate with, they just get tired of being tested all the time. And there'll be arguments. And in some cases, they just might leave. But then the guy says, see, I knew this would happen. I knew I couldn't trust her.
But in fact, he really was the cause.
Well, I'm using a broad example here to illustrate a point. So I would say that it's true in this context that that's true. I mean, we can actually be the instigator of the problem. In essence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We expect it to happen, and to a certain extent, we cause it to happen.
Ken, in our last program, you said that a lot of these issues started when we experienced a divorce as a child. Is that true of this trust issue as well?
Well, actually, yeah. Before the divorce, we trusted our parents unconditionally. Most of us had no reason not to trust them. As kids, we lived by, what I'll call the kids' rule book. It's kind of an imaginary book that holds unwritten rules that parents are expected to follow. And that first rule is that mom and dad are supposed to love each other and be together in the family forever.
Sure.
And divorce, of course, shatters that rule. And even worse, the two most important people in their lives who are supposed to be in love are now saying horrible things about each other. So to the child, breaking this rule is like taking, say, a favorite picture, dropping it on the floor, watching it break, and then watching helplessly as mom and dad jump up and down on the broken frame.
Oh, wow. That's a sad image. Okay, now, you said you don't blame the parents. That sounds like blaming them.
Well, it does, but I'm not. It's interesting. Divorce creates this cloud of secrecy, and children are never able to share how they feel. And we grow up, and we still haven't dealt with it. Talking about it enables us to get these issues out, and it allows God to bring healing to us. And I believe we can do that without blaming our parents.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to clarify that because I'm sure that maybe some of our other listeners was thinking the same thing. It sounds like we were blaming them for that.
Well, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
All right. Now, let's get back on track then. So then what is the second children's rule that divorce breaks?
Okay. Well, Rule 2 says that parents are supposed to supply children's needs and keep them secure and safe. Jesus said in Matthew 6:25 and 26, do not worry about your life, what you'll eat, what you'll drink, nor about your body, what you'll put on. Is life not more than food and body more than clothing? But many of us did worry about these things because after the divorce, food, shelter, and clothing often seem dependent on a timely child support check. But moving on, rule number 3 in the kids' minds says parents are expected to honor their words.
That is definitely a rule in my house.
Well, it applies in every house. I have 3 kids, and I learned real quick that when my kids asked a question, if it required a yes or no answer, I had to answer yes or no. Maybe was interpreted in their little brains as yes. I'll think about it meant yes. Let's talk about it later meant yes. In their minds, any phrase or word other than the word no was yes. But this is the key. After the divorce, kids expect parents to continue to honor their words. But often, well-meaning moms and dads don't.
Okay, you better give me an example of that.
Well, after the divorce, statements are made like, well, of course, I'll see you all the time. Or the divorce won't affect my love for you. Or, I won't miss your game. Or, well, yeah, your mom and I are getting a divorce, but things won't change for you. And to adults, these are statements. And sometimes things happen that you have to change, even though they have good intentions. But as adults, we understand that. But as kids, these are not statements. They're promises. And promises shouldn't be broken.
And when they are broken, it really breaks the child's trust as well as their heart.
Basically. And when unmet promises are combined with parents who have animosity toward each other and, add on that the kid feels insecure and unsafe, it really affects the child's ability to trust, over the long term.
They take this mistrust then into their adulthood, but they don't realize that they're carrying that baggage along with them.
Exactly. And the next rule, if it's broken, even it has worse consequences. The fourth rule in the kid's mind says that parents should practice what they preach.
Oh.
And divorce, it wreaks havoc with this one, often.
Yeah. Okay. Now you better explain this one carefully.
Okay. Well, I'll give you a couple examples, of how divorced parents, might teach one thing, but they act differently. Okay. Now, for instance, young children are taught, don't talk to strangers.
Okay.
And this works until the parents split up. And again, from the child's perspective, and I keep saying that, but because we have to look at things from their viewpoint. But from the child's perspective, things get confusing when parents start seeing other people. The adult, for example, the mom, is happy to have the attention and companionship of a new man, However, the child, they knew their dad. And, this new man, though he might be familiar to the mom, is a stranger to an 8-year-old.
Sure.
But they're expected to trust this new person. But then the relationship stops. Then another man is around, and the child is supposed to trust them. And from the child's perspective, the line blurs, and life becomes confusing and frustrating.
That makes sense when you put it that way.
The bottom line is that when these rules are broken, children of divorce, they'll start to accept the lie that all people just can't be trusted. And when they become adults, sadly, this lie affects their ability to trust so much that they get to the point where they believe the only person they can trust is themselves. They expect all people and all situations to fail them. And that list of people can include friends, coworkers, spouses, and even God if they're not careful.
Ooh. Kent, Proverbs 3:5 says that we should trust in the Lord with all of our heart. But you seem to be saying that adults with divorced parents have a real problem with that.
Well, unfortunately, yes. As a child, if you can't trust your mom and dad, who you can see, to follow the rules, if you will, how do you trust a God who you can't see? And one step further, how do you trust a God who let all this happen? Who let your world collapse?
Boy, those are really tough questions.
Well, fortunately, God provides the answer. Basically, God has rules too. And one of them is that he won't interfere with our choices to do right or wrong. This is best illustrated in Genesis chapters 2 and 3. There we see Adam and Eve could choose to follow God's plan and avoid the tree of good and evil, or choose their own plan. And they chose to follow their own plan. And mankind has suffered the consequences of sin ever since. And our parents had a similar choice. They could follow God's plan, or they could follow their own plan. Unfortunately, one or both of them chose to follow their own plan, and we've been dealing with the consequences ever since.
Yeah, and trusting God's plan is, of course, always our best choice.